Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. Wherever you are, whether it's morning or afternoon, I always have to resist the temptation to say, good morning and hopefully if you're joining, please let me know if you can't hear me, or just let me know that you can. Give me a wave. Send me a little, okay, great, hi. Nice to see you. Hello. So fun to see the people who are joining. And as always, as we dive into the topic here, I really invite this to be oh good, so glad you can hear me. Okay, great. So I really invite this to be a conversation. It's my intention to share my own personal experience. I want to share my own personal experience here. I want to give some of the things I think are important, but I also really enjoy the dialogue. I love to hear your questions. I love to see your comments, your own personal shares, and as always, I even enjoy disagreement. That's the word I'm looking for. So feel free to bring it all. I'll do my best to both speak and stay connected to the comments and hopefully stay on track. Although I have a tendency to wander, so forgive me if I do. I wanted to share about a process that I put myself in coming up on about 2 years ago. I call it my no man diet. And, other people either that I've led through this process, both in terms of like no man diet or no woman diet, have preferred to call it a cleanse or anyway, you can come up with your own word for, I don't diet, like I'm not a dieter, but no man diet just worked for me. I think it harkens back to, we used to call it the no man diet when I was running AMP with my ex-husband, Decker Kunov. And so that lands for me. So I'm going to call it the no man diet. You can call it whatever you want. And there's, there's a lot of reason. I see enormous value, whether you're, gay, straight, like whether you're taking space from men, whether you're taking it from women. I think this is an incredibly, incredibly valuable process. And I'm just going to talk about it from this perspective because it's how I did it. So for me, I started to notice, I won't go into the huge backstory for the sake of time, but a lot of what happened for me was I was noticing my own habits in relation to men and dating that had to do with I would say at their real baseline for me, they had to do with not believing that I could have the kind of partnership that I really longed for. And that showed up in a variety of ways in terms of how I related to the men that I was dating, how I was relating to the fathers of my children, what I was willing to ask for, what I was willing to reveal about myself. There was this sort of fundamental piece that was running the show that really had to do with not believing that I could have the kind of partnership I wanted. And so through some getting clear on that, through support, frankly, of some very, very dear men friends, and it's some who had been lovers and, others who hadn't, but that I really came to this conclusion that for me, taking a really intentional space. And I do want to clarify that although there's deep work that happens when we don't happen to be dating or having sex, there's a different kind of process that happens when you take it on with a true consciousness and intentionality. When you say this, I'm setting this container and for this long, and you really stick with it. That's different than not happening to date over a certain amount of time, even when that time is very long. So it became clear that for me to really set a clear amount of time where I was calling my no man diet, And it started out, I want to say two things about this. One is that I started it with the intention of 3 months. And yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to do that in a minute, Todd. So somebody just asked, what does a no-man diet consist of? Maybe I'll do that part first. I got stuck there in something. Okay, I'll do that part first. So I say the beginning of it was no dating, no sex, no being in relationship, kind of that. I can't get out of some screen that I'm in. Sorry. All right, I'm just going to keep going. So that was how it started. And this is part of what I want to say is that actually there was kind of, I mean, that's deep work in and of itself, but it's kind of at the surface level because I date men. For me, that was no dating, no sex, no getting into relationships, like all of that was in my no man diet. Didn't mean I couldn't talk to men. I work with men, you know, and you have to go to the grocery store, you know, who knows, all these kinds of things. I'm hoping I can still see your comments, even though okay, here we go. Oh, hi, Nikki. Nice to see you for a moment. So hope that answers, at least at the surface level, your question. And this is actually something that I wanted to address, which is that was at the surface level. And that already felt quite intense to me, even though I wasn't dating a lot. It wasn't like I was dating a lot or a lot of men, but just saying that I wasn't like in the market. I wasn't putting my attention in that direction at all. That felt quite intense to me. My coach at the time was Craig. This is funny. I don't know how to say his last name. It's either Filek or Filek. But my coach was Craig. And I remember we had a coaching call soon after I made this decision. And he asked me this question, which I think is really important. So there was this surface level of what I had decided for. And he said, what is if you're being called to this, you know, what is being asked of you at a bigger level? Sort of why? What is the bigger why? And so I'll get to that question in just a minute, Todd. And what came to me in that moment when he asked me that question was I'm being asked to get in right relationship with the masculine. So it wasn't just about men anymore. It was really, I'm being asked, you know, at this more universal level to get in right relationship with the masculine, to get in right relationship with my masculine, men's masculine, women, like this, at a much bigger level. And this is one of the ways that I was really going at it. So I want to check in here. I saw, so again, how is it different from a Buddhist nun's vow? So I would say the difference is that's a lifetime vow. And it's usually also in a particular, in one way, there's not a difference, but in another way, I would say it's a big difference to be a woman who ultimately is going to choose relationship, partnership, sex, like a worldly life, but to specifically remove this particular area. So I did not go live in a monastery in this time. I have lived in a monastery, and frankly, when I lived in the monastery, I wasn't celibate. That's funny. But to actually live a worldly life, but take this particular piece and say, I will, it's not exactly turn my attention away, but it's creating a certain limitation in that area. So that's how I would say that it's different. And then just to check in, I see Allison said no sex. Yeah. So what I will say, Todd, is that it was a spiritual discipline. Absolutely a spiritual discipline during this time. It's a physical discipline, but it ultimately, and I want to get to this, but it touched deeply, sacred, spiritual, emotional. I mean, what I touched during this time was so deep. And frankly, some of it was quite dark. Some of it was quite blissful. Some of it was awful. So that's getting a little bit ahead of myself. But there were two things I wanted to say. And one was specifically clarifying, like if this is something you're interested in, and I also wanted to share my own experience, which is clarifying a bigger why. So I knew that there was something valuable for me in this, partly because it fucking scared the living shit out of me. So that's always a sign to me. But then when Craig asked me, what's being asked of you at the deepest level? And beyond no dating, no sex, it was like, oh, I'm being asked to actually get in right relationship with the masculine. So that became like an undercurrent for me. And the other piece I want to touch on there was the length. So ultimately my no man diet was 6 months long. But I went through a process around that. When I first made the commitment, I chose 3 months, and that seemed long to me. Like I had broken up with a long-term partner. Kevin. I had just ended a a very, very deep relationship with a lover. And 3 months felt very long to me, but as Kevin says, but does size really matter? And I had this experience right after I made the commitment to myself. I remember I was driving. I'd actually just dropped this lover that I had now just completed with off at the airport. And I was thinking like this 3 month, and what happened was that I caught myself. I knew where I was going to be in 3 months. There was a specific training. I knew where it was. I knew who would be there. And I caught myself like imagining catching up with that particular lover. I was planning for the end of 3 months. And in that moment for me, I realized 3 months was too short. It was like, if any of you have ever done a cleanse or a juice fast or just fasted, and it's like going to the grocery store and buying the ingredients for making cookies while you're on your cleanse. Was what I was doing. And I caught it and I was like, oh, it has to be longer. Like 3 months for me wasn't actually enough time to really give myself to the practice. And in that moment, so I was in the car, in that moment, like, again, it was kind of through my mind. It was in my body also. Suddenly I knew, I was like, oh fuck, it's a year. And I started sobbing. Just like I had to pull over to the side of the road because it was unsafe to drive. It was like that kind of like bodily release. And I realized what that was for me was that when I threw the date out to a year, I let go of every possible holdout. Like any man in my life that I thought like, well, that might still be there for me. It was all gone. There was no one was gonna wait for me for a year. There was no like little thread that I could hold on to or little way to keep somebody interested in me for 12 months. And so what that did for me, that was important for me, was, this is a funny one, but it was like I gave up hope. And I needed that. I actually needed to kind of hit this point of no return and just let it all go and just be like, touch the absolute, touch the absolute darkness of aloneness forever, but on purpose, and not hide from it at all. And then about 2 weeks after that, I had a conversation with my friend Rana Wilson, who's she's a beautiful teacher and woman and practitioner in her own right. And I remember sharing with her this process. And when I said that piece about the 12 months and my physical response to it, again, this is all my process. And if you ever do something like this, it's your own. But I would like to give you some guiding posts for it. So she said there was this pause. I shared that piece with her, and there was about like 45 seconds. It was just silence. And then she said very quietly, but it was sort of it was firm. And she said, Kendra, it's not meant to be a punishment. And that, again, it was like this wave that washed over me and through me. And I started weeping. And I was like, oh, right. This is not meant to be a punishment. I haven't done anything wrong. This is meant to serve. And so in the whole spectrum of that, what became very clear was that it was important to really set 6 months. And I could always choose another 6 months if that was really necessary. But for me, again, it was also really important actually to set a length of time rather than say like, well, I'm on it and I'll feel when I'm done. Because frankly, most of the time for most of us, what that means is like, I'll just do it until I don't want to anymore. And then I'll do whatever I want to do. And that's fine, but that's not the kind of practice that cultivates depth or that actually pushes us through like our old and deep shadow and resistance. Whenever we can give something up, whenever we just don't feel like it anymore. So I made that quite public. I don't know if I made it like Facebook public at the time, but I told many people. I told all the people who were closest and nearest and dearest to me, men and women. I shared with, again, mostly women. I had a few really dear men friends, and I had my coach was a man. But I shared with a lot of women in my life. And that was important. So that's a certain kind of support. I made the commitment to myself, but I also made the commitment to them. And it was less like, I need you to hold me to this, but having said it to them, that was holding me. And I asked people. I mean, people offered, but I also asked people, can I reach out to you? Will you hold me? And I was incredibly grateful to have a coach during that time, and also to have friends that I could really call when I was literally sitting on my kitchen floor, like in tears, and didn't know why I should get up off the floor ever. When I felt very dark and very alone and didn't know why I was doing this or what I was doing, who held me in that and also reflected what they saw in me back to myself. The depth of the practice, what they saw as beautiful in me. I'm going to come back to this actually because it's at the end. So support is really important. There were people I asked and where it was explicit, but also frankly, I just started like texting people with no context. Just when I'd either need to say something or I'd need to vent or I would need something to be seen or I would have a request. Like I just started reaching out. And one of the most profound pieces for me was noticing how often my initial impulse for support was to reach out to a man. I didn't know that about myself before I did this. I have always had really good women friends and lots of them. And so it was a new awareness to realize that in some of the most tender parts of me, my first impulse was to reach out to my close men friends. And it felt so incredibly tender and vulnerable and terrifying to be in that place with my women friends. And so because I saw that, I very intentionally I would make it my practice to do that instead. I created, group text threads with women in my life that I would reach out to instead. And I have dear men friends and I still included them, but it was a way of strengthening another muscle and bringing awareness to that as a habit and a place that was avoiding where I had support from women, and how tender it was to include my women in those places in me. So that's a piece of support. I've also, I mean, this is kind of tangential, but as a coach and as a facilitator, like I've led both men and women through this process. And it is, you know, having that kind of support is invaluable. I had a coach during this time as well, or I had two coaches. And I've seen that in my clients as well, where, you know, what comes up, the amazing ways that our mind wants to wiggle out and find excuses why this is okay or that's okay, or this doesn't count, is like, it's extraordinary. So this actually, I'm gonna bring this in, even though it was at the very end, because this links very well to it, which is that some of my deepest learnings came in the last 2 weeks, when I'd been on this for 5.5 months. I mean, it had been incredible. It had totally reoriented my relationship with my now partner, who, you know, at that time, then I was not dating him because I was on a no-man diet. And even moments he would come over and he would be like, what, come on, can't we make out? And like having be like, no, we really can't. And he and I had to find, what we had to find in that was, again, it was like new neural pathways. We had to find new ways to connect, because we had used sex as like a shortcut. We could always find our connection sexually, and then that supported us in being able to find other intimacy. So it was like we had to find that intimacy without using sex. And one of the things that we also really found in that time was family. We actually found ourselves as a family. And I mean, even when I ended, I want to say we did not know that we would be together for another chunk of time, and really entered that with a lot of consciousness. But what we found as a family is like, it's the most priceless thing maybe ever in my life. So that was a huge piece for me in that. But getting back to this piece, so all of these, you know, I had reoriented some of my relationships with men that I teach with. I'd had some, you know, deep and painful and transformative conversations. I'd shared truths that I'd been afraid to share for years. It was quite a deep process, and I'm sure that I will share more about it, because there's only so much I can say in, you know, 30 minutes. But so I was 5.5 months in. I was 2 weeks till the end. I was on this retreat. An old lover of mine was going to be there. It was quite romantic, actually. It was the whole, like, everything was going to be a setup. I was like, oh, come on. Like, I've done it, right? I mean, I've done the thing. 5.5 months is a long ass time. Look at all of these learnings. Look at all this transformation. You know, look at these deep places I've found in myself. Look at, like, and I remember I didn't quite know until afterwards, but in hindsight, I can see I chose this very nice friend of mine. Like, she's very sweet. And I basically went to her and said, I can sleep with him, right? Like, and in hindsight, again, I think I chose this particular woman because I thought she would say yes, because she just doesn't say no very often. She's kind of a yes, and like a sweet kind of woman. And so I brought all this to her thinking she'd be like, yeah, totally, Kendra, like that makes sense, you know, and I remember I had never really seen her like this before. And she stopped and she looked dead in my eyes and she just said no. And it wasn't even a no, like externally anyone gets to say what I do or I don't do. Of course I got to choose myself, but she was actually showing me my own truth, when I didn't want to see it, which is that it was important to finish it out the way I had intended. She just said no. And I felt it completely. I was like, oh, you're right. No, that's not the right thing. It's a disservice to me. It's a disservice to him. It's a disservice. It was like, that is not what will serve. And I mean, I just give thanks for her landing that in me so clearly, because that process of, it's like, what do they talk about? You know, you run through the finish line, right? Like you don't run up to the finish line, you run through the finish line. And that's what that allowed me to do. And that last 2 weeks and that time was fucking brutal. Like it hurt like hell. And I clung to the kind of the last scraps of the potential for, you know, attention I could get from this man. And it truly like burned something away inside me that I will be forever grateful for. That ultimately has allowed me to have a whole different, first of all, a whole different relationship with that man. Like just, I can't even, I don't even have words for kind of the gratitude I have for that. But then what that showed me in myself was invaluable. So the last piece I would say that was so important, both for me and then for people that I've held through this process, is not only, there's the clarity of your bigger why that I talked to at the beginning, like what's being asked of you here. But there's also, there's so much in, you know, when we talk about a diet or it's no man, becomes very easy to say, this is what I'm not going to do. All the things you're not allowed to do. So, and somebody asked me at the beginning, they said, what does that entail? And, you know, it was kind of at the surface level. It was like, no dating, no sex, no relationship. It also became, you know, it became clear when I got the piece from answering my coach's question, like what's being asked of me, and the response in me, like that arose of I'm being asked to get in right relationship with the masculine. It also became clear, it was like, oh, any place that I'm like trying to be externally validated that my existence is worthy through the masculine gaze. Mostly men, occasionally the masculine in women or in myself are like this, but the masculine, any place that I'm trying to validate my existence through the masculine gaze, it was letting go of that. That was the hardest part. And it's subtle and it's nuanced, and maybe I'll do a whole video about just that, because it was sneaky like a motherfucker, but it was letting go of that. So, but that's all, still all the like, what are you not allowed to do? You know, not allowed to flirt, not allowed to all these things. And so it became also incredibly important for me. And then again, the clients that I've kind of worked with through this, that they also be choosing, what are they saying yes to? And some of that was, you know, for me, it was practices. It was during that time that I like put this particular yoga class with this particular teacher, that it became a non-negotiable on my calendar. Like I had it on my calendar for a year, and I would 90% of the time it would get scheduled over by something more important. And it was during this time that became like this literally like non-negotiable time, as if I had a client call, as if I was, you know, working, as if it was the same level, and it changed my life. You know, it was like a morning practice for me became non-negotiable. Certain like ceremonies that I was doing around the moon became these consistents in my life in a way that I had longed for a very long time, but had never done. And it's one of those things where it's not this, it's hard to, it wasn't direct. It wasn't like I was going out on dates instead of doing new moon ceremony, but somehow just the attention or just the, whatever that was going out towards men or the masculine, or my desire to be in a relationship, like the part of me that was saying, please, you know, all I want is to be in a relationship. My life will be complete when I'm in a relationship. Or any place that I was validating my own existence through the masculine gaze, that by releasing that, there was some other energy that also came through where all of that became, I almost want to say easy. Certainly it was not easy. Simple, maybe, is a better word. But these things fell into place in a way that I had been longing for. And some of that happened quite organically, but some of it also was important. And some of this I worked out with my coach, or again with other friends, women friends. What is it that I'm also, that as I remove this, what am I also putting in? And then this is a really important note. And then I want to end here. And again, if anyone has questions or comments or shares, please, I'm happy to see them in these last few moments before we actually close. But as I speak about what was I bringing into the space of what I was removing, I want to also be very clear that a big part of this was not filling the space. But I had to do that on purpose. So like a lot of actual space got opened up, but also an enormous amount of emotional or energetic space got opened up. And as they say, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. And so the desire for things to start like just rushing in to fill that space, even things we might call beneficial, right? Like to fill it with yoga, to fill it with chanting, to fill it with practice, to fill it with meditation, to fill it with, you know, going out with my girlfriends. All those things were good things, and I needed those. But at its deepest point, part of what actually became very clear to me was my own fear of space and the void, like my own deep anxiety with the void. And that was a place of like, oh fuck, what if I gave up these practices too, and I was truly in the void. So it's a little bit of a dark place to end, but it's also very, very true. So again, thank you, Lisa and Jenna, for, I feel you feeling that. I know you both to be, you know, deep women of practice. So I'll stay here for another couple minutes in case there are other shares to be brought into the space, or any points of clarification. And again, I'm sure that I will talk about this more because it's so deep and nuanced. But it's one of the it was one of my favorite and least favorite things of all time. It was absolute worst, absolute best. And so there's a way that I deeply, you know, it's a piece that I often offer or invite people into when I see this as a potential in their life. Thank you, Jenna. I see, this is the other piece for me, is that the process itself was so important. But frankly, like I look at my actual partnership right now, and I know without a shadow of a doubt, it would not have been possible if I had not gone through this process. Kevin, how did you determine when you were doing a practice that supported your life and the no-mat diet versus the same or other practices that you were using to fill the vacuum? Aside from, I think that says ice cream. Ice cream is always good. How did I determine? It's a great question. Some of that, some of it came over time. So there were a lot of things that ultimately at some point I was like, oh, I'm using that to fill the void, or I'm terrified of dropping that. Like there was this, I don't know if this will make sense. I almost didn't want to say it because it's hard to make sense of it. But I remember this point that I hit. I remember I was literally sitting on my kitchen floor and I was just sobbing. And it was touching this place that was terrified that if I gave up like my life of practice, I would just be disgusting. Like I was going to be boring and gross and fat and ugly and just like all those external things, but like at my core, it was clear that who I was just fundamentally disgusting. And every practice, like there was nothing that wasn't in some way trying to cover up the fact that at my core, I was just disgusting. And so that was just an important place for me to hit. I'm laughing because I'm like, no one's ever going to want to do this ever again after I say this. And in that moment, I mean, all I can say is in that moment, it was maybe one of the most horrifying moments of my life. And I am like so deeply grateful for having touched that part of myself. And in some way befriending it, like befriending that really disgusting part of myself. That was just massively transformational. Thanks for the love. I appreciate it. So, but to come back to your direct question, Kevin, I also want to say I asked people. That was one of the things I did in this time, was that I asked people, like, what do you think about this? Can I do this? Is this okay? Should I do this? Like I kind of, I set the container ahead of time. I had people that I were holding me inside of that. I had, there was certain structures. And then even inside of that, there was you were one of those people, Kevin, like, is this okay? Michael Porcelli was one of those people. My coach, Craig Fillek, my women friends, Allison Lanier, trying to think. Anyway, there were just people that I would ask, it was like a practice in trusting that. It wasn't that I trusted them more than myself, but it was like I trusted them more than my habits. And I was aware that the whole practice itself was a practice in coming up against my habits and being willing to release them. Like habits of survival, basically, and so trusting other people beyond my habits of who I knew myself to be. So thanks for asking the question. Yes, Jenna, facing shame is its own medicine. And frankly, we just did a whole piece of shadow work in the relationship and intimacy program that John and I run. And it's beautiful because I've noticed this, but to watch other people see how slippery shadow is. By its very nature, it wants to stay hidden, right? It only has power so long as it's shadow. And shame is a piece of shadow, right? It wants to stay, that's the only way that it maintains its power. So yes, anyway, I will not go on that tangent because then we'll be here all day. But thank you. I really deeply appreciate those of you who were with me here live and brought your attention, your questions, your shares. I totally appreciate any of you who are watching the replay, and invite you also to bring your questions or comments, and I'll come back in and we can do it less real time, but I love engaging that way too. And yeah, I wish all of you a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day. I'm sending you much love. Ciao.